Number 8. Plymouth Fury. The Plymouth Fury in 1963 was the top-line full-size Plymouth, the car above the Belvedere in the Savoy and the Plymouth lineup, the one that communicated the specific aspiration that Chrysler's Plymouth division had been building toward since the nameplate's introduction in 1956. Plymouth's total production in 1963 reached 488,448 units, placing the brand fourth in American sales behind Chevrolet, Ford, and Pontiac, ahead of Oldsmobile, Rambler, and Buick, and the Fury's position at the top of that lineup made it the destination that every Plymouth Belvedere buyer was measuring their financial progress against. Its 318 or 383 cubic inch V8 options gave the full-size Plymouth buyer the performance range that 1963 required, at a price the Chrysler dealer could present as the logical upgrade from the Belvedere. Stephen King set his 1983 novel Christine around a 1958 Plymouth Fury, the detail that kept the nameplate in cultural memory. In 1963, the Fury was the full-size Plymouth that Chrysler offered to the buyer who had decided on Plymouth and wanted the top of what Plymouth had. The Fury is at number 8 because the nameplate that every American over 50 knows from a novel and a film was, in 1963, a full-size family car selling in honest commercial territory, and because the car that became famous for being haunted was, before the haunting, simply the correct Plymouth for the buyer who could afford the best one. Number 7. Chevrolet Nova or Chevy II. The Chevrolet Chevy II had been introduced in 1962 as General Motors' domestic answer to the Volkswagen Beetle and the Rambler American, a conventional front-engine, rear-wheel drive compact that Chevrolet had engineered in under 2 years to address the segment that the Corvaire's unconventional rear-engine layout and the Rambler's pricing had demonstrated was commercially real and growing. By 1963, the Chevy II carried the Nova name as its top trim level, the beginning of a nameplate that would outlast the Chevy II designation by decades and that would eventually produce some of the most documented drag strip records in American compact history. In 1963, it was simply the sensible Chevrolet compact that Chevrolet dealers could describe without footnotes to the buyer who wanted a small car from a name they already trusted. Its inline-4 and inline-6 options gave the buyer the economy argument without the engineering conversation that the Corvair required. No explanation of rear-engine dynamics, no discussion of swing axle handling, no Ralph Nader necessary. The Nova is at number 7 because in 1963, Chevrolet needed a compact that required no explanation, and the Nova name that 1963's top trim established would carry Chevrolet's compact argument through 2 decades and into the drag strip records that the plain-looking compact nobody photographed at the time is still famous for today.
Number 6. Plymouth Valiant. The Plymouth Valiant in 1963 was carrying the slant-6 engine that Chrysler had been refining since 1960, inclined 30 degrees from vertical so that its oil distribution geometry could serve the bearing surfaces through the ownership cycles that compact car buyers in 1963 were beginning to measure in terms of years rather than months. Plymouth's total production figure for 1963 was 488,448 units, fourth in American brand sales, ahead of Oldsmobile and Rambler and Buick. The Valiant occupied the compact position in that Plymouth total, giving the buyer who had decided on a compact and decided on Plymouth the same slant-6 reliability argument that its near-identical cousin the Dodge Dart was simultaneously making from the Dodge dealer across the street. Its 225 cubic inch slant-6, its unit body construction, and its price at the entry level of the Plymouth lineup gave the Valiant buyer the compact domestic argument that 1963's market was generating demand for, before the Mustang would redirect that demand towards something that communicated considerably more than sensible transportation at an accessible price. The Valiant is at number 6 because Plymouth sold 488,000 cars in 1963 with the Valiant as a significant portion of that figure, and because the slant-6 that powered it was accumulating the service documentation that would make it the most recommended compact engine in America by the end of the decade. Number 5. Ford Falcon. The Ford Falcon in 1963 was 2 years away from the irreversible commercial consequence of having proven that the American compact market was real and profitable. The Ford Mustang, which had been designed around the Falcon's platform and which would take the majority of the Falcon's buyers when it arrived in April 1964. In 1963, the Falcon was still selling in the hundreds of thousands as the practical compact Ford that the American family of modest means or practical inclinations could choose without apologizing for the choice. It had beaten the Corvair and the Rambler in compact sales when the Big Three compact competition was at its most commercially significant, and in 1963 it was still making the straightforward compact argument that had produced that result. Its inline 6 options, its 4-door sedan and station wagon configurations, and its price below the Fairline and far below the Galaxie gave the Ford dealer a compact conversation that the Mustang's arrival would immediately redirect, but that in 1963 was still producing 6-figure sales volumes. The Falcon is at number 5 because in the last full model year before the car built on its platform arrived to redirect its buyers, the Ford Compact was still selling to the American family that needed the most practical Ford at the most accessible price, and because the car that proved the Mustang's market existed has never received the acknowledgement that the sequence of events suggests it deserves.
Number 4. Pontiac Bonneville. The Pontiac Bonneville in 1963 was the full-size Pontiac that the American family, which had arrived, chose to communicate that arrival. Its 389 cubic inch V8, its Hydra-matic automatic, and its standard power accessory list placed it at the top of the Pontiac lineup, above the Catalina, above the Star Chief, as the car that every successful Pontiac buyer was moving toward as their career continued, and the neighbor across the driveway was watching what arrived. Pontiac's total grand production in 1963 was 590,071 units, third in American brand sales behind only Chevrolet and Ford, and the Bonneville's position at the top of that lineup made it the destination that every Pontiac Catalina buyer was measuring their financial progress against. In 1963, Pontiac was also the division where a Tempest product manager named John DeLorean was installing a 389 cubic inch V8 in the mid-size Le Mans and preparing to introduce it for the 1964 model year as an option package called the GTO. The Bonneville had no knowledge of this. The Bonneville is at number 4 because in 1963, the full-size Pontiac at the top of the third best-selling American automotive brand was the car that the American family with sufficient income chose to make the fact of having sufficient income legible from the street, and because the division building it was simultaneously preparing the car that would eventually make the Bonneville's kind of aspiration feel like a different conversation entirely. Number 3. Dodge Dart. The Dodge Dart in 1963 had just undergone its most significant transformation. It had been repositioned from a full-size car, the large chrome-laden Dart that Dodge had been producing since 1960, to a compact built on the A-body platform that Chrysler was sharing with the Plymouth Valiant. The new Dart was smaller, lighter, more economical, and powered by the 170 or 225 cubic inch slant 6 that Chrysler had been improving since 1960. The result was one of the most commercially successful product repositionings in American automotive history. Dart sales accounted for more than 1/3 of Dodge's entire 1963 production, helping push the Dodge brand to 446,129 total units, nearly double what the division had sold the previous year, with the larger, more expensive configuration. The slant 6's 30-degree inclination from vertical gave its oil distribution geometry a mechanical advantage over conventional upright engines that the service record was beginning to document in terms that the independent mechanic who had serviced both could describe with specificity. The Dart is at number 3 because Chrysler's decision to reposition a full-size nameplate as a compact produced the largest single-year sales jump in Dodge's history, and because the slant 6 in the compact body was exactly the correct answer to what the American compact buyer was asking in 1963, in the year before the Mustang would ask a completely different question. Number 2. Ford Galaxie 500. The Ford Galaxie 500 in 1963 produced 722,647 units, the second highest production figure of any passenger car in America that year, behind only the Chevrolet Impala's 832,600. The Galaxie 500 had arrived at that figure through the same commercial logic that the Impala was exploiting simultaneously: six-passenger interior, V8 engine options ranging from the 289 cubic inch small block to the 427 cubic inch big block that Ford's NASCAR program had been developing, with results that the Daytona 500 had confirmed, and the Ford dealer network that reached every American county. Gas cost 29 cents per gallon. Nobody was calculating fuel cost as the primary variable. The Galaxie 500's 427 cubic inch engine option, producing 410 or 425 horsepower in high-performance trim, was a racing engine installed in a family car's body at a price that required no competition license. Its fastback roofline in the Galaxie 500's Sport hardtop gave buyers the exact aerodynamic body that Ford's NASCAR program had developed for the superspeedways, making a 425 horsepower race car available disguised as a family sedan. The Galaxie 500 is at number 2 because 722,647 Americans chose the full-size Ford in 1963, and because the 109,953 unit gap between it and the Impala's 832,600 is the most commercially contested top 2 position any two cars have occupied at the top of the American sales chart in a single year. Number 1. Chevrolet Corvette Sting Ray. The Chevrolet Corvette Sting Ray sold 21,113 units in 1963. The Impala sold 832,600. If this list ranked by sales volume, the Sting Ray would not appear. The Sting Ray is at number 1 because Chevrolet introduced the most significant American automobile design of the decade, the C2 body by Bill Mitchell, with hidden headlights, a knife-edge front end, fully independent rear suspension, and in the coupe only, the split rear window that Zora Duntov hated for compromising rearward visibility, that Bill Mitchell kept because it was perfect, and that Chevrolet never repeated. That split window exists on 10,594 cars built in a single model year. The 1963 Corvette Sting Ray Coupe is among the most valuable American production cars of the post-war era, not because it was rare when new, but because what it represented in 1963 was the precise moment the Corvette stopped being the car that its defenders had to justify and started being the car that the automotive world measured everything else against. Corvette production had climbed 48% from the previous year. The factory added a second shift and still could not build them fast enough. The Sting Ray is at number 1 because in the year before the Mustang defined what the American performance car meant to the general public, the Corvette Sting Ray defined what it meant to the automotive world, and because the 21,513 Americans who drove one home in 1963 were driving a car their grandchildren would spend 6 figures to own.